I would like to start by making a proclamation, and that is that the era of small-scale software is over. So it feels like wherever you look, on your phone, on your computer, in your home, at work, and in most of society, most of the software that you see is part of something much bigger. The apps on your phone typically connect to the cloud. So do the applications on your computer. Maybe you have like smart home devices, always connected as well. Your car is downloading updates and maps and software all the time if you have a recent one. And government e-services are connected together and working as part of something much larger. This doesn't mean that no small-scale software is being developed, of course, but I would say that if you look at what people are excited about and what is up and coming, it's mostly big, massive systems of connected parts, like IoT plus applications plus cloud plus artificial intelligence plus a lot of other stuff. This puts a lot of weight on both development processes and on flows. For one, it's not easy to build, like if you want to build and deploy firmware to an IoT device, that's not typically the same set of tools and the same type of flows that you have if you want to deploy a new version of a cloud service. So this makes it complicated to connect processes and flows together. But one thing that really helps when you want to do that is having a common language. And that is what we're going to be talking about now. So again, my name is Erik Sternerson. I work with Dual and Volvo Cars, and I will talk about my view on what Eiffel is and why we should care. We are going to cover three parts in this talk. First, what is the purpose of Eiffel? Second, what is Eiffel? And third, why do we claim that it's something to keep an eye on and care about? So let's start with the purpose. My view is that Eiffel is here to provide a common language, and specifically a common language for communication between tools and people, I would say, in CI/CD systems. So instead of having a situation where people are speaking different languages and some people understand and some people don't, we have a situation with Eiffel where if someone comes in and says, for instance, announcement published, everybody knows what that means because everybody agrees on how things are communicated. Having a common language gives two very strong benefits. One is observability. So you have some actor here. It could be a system, it could be a visualization tool, it could be an aggregation tool or something like that, that just wants to understand what is going on. And there are plenty of actors down here. Could be different test tools or services or whatever we have that is part of the CI system. It could even be people who are sending events via some CLI or something. But if they are all sending Eiffel events, then the observer just needs to implement the Eiffel protocol. And there are libraries and stuff for that, which Matthias will talk more about later. But having everyone agreeing on how to communicate means that observability is much easier than trying to integrate with every tool that we want to use for all those different type of processes and flows that we have in large-scale software development. Another part, a few things that we get with observability is understanding of what we have built, what changes are included in that build, how do we test the build, and from those tests, what do we think about the quality? And questions like this can help us answer the perhaps higher level question of, are we ready to release? And having, again, common language where everyone who has something to say about these questions publish Eiffel event to a shared event bus. That means that any actor that listens to that bus can answer these questions by looking at and understanding the info messages. So that is very powerful. Second aspect then that I would like to focus on is interoperability. So again, I mentioned having multiple different tools. I mean, even if you're building something relatively simple, you still usually have different tools. Your build tool is typically not the same as your test tool, for instance. And your orchestrator or flow engine or whatever you want to call it is typically not the same as your image store or artifact storage. So with interoperability, we enable different tools to communicate in a way that other tools can understand that there is something they need to do. So you have your actor saying that I have made a change in the source, and that gets picked up by another system or tool that says, okay, now I need to start a build. And then it announces when that build is completed. And then something else says, oh, now there's a new build, I need to start testing it. And then it gets deployed, and maybe there's an announcement saying that now this thing is up and running, ready for use. So interoperability allows every tool that listens to events to understand what just happened and what did it happen to. Like, okay, I understand that the build was finished, but is it a build that I'm interested in? And did it go well? For instance, in a test case, was the test successful? Was the build successful? And you can also see as part of the event then where to find more information, because you probably don't want to send absolutely everything in the message, but you can find more information from there. And this then helps tools and systems and even people, I would say, to basically figure out what should my next action be. So observability to understand what is going on, and interoperability to understand what the next step should be. They are related, but I think they are two important aspects to think about when we're talking about Eiffel. So with that out of the way, again, I will claim then that Eiffel, the purpose of Eiffel is to provide a common language. Now we can talk about what Eiffel is. I'm not going to shy away from some details, but I'm also not going to go too deep into details. I think my main purpose here is to give everyone here a good foundation to participate in the sessions that will come later. And yeah, let's go with that approach. And if you have any questions, feel free to raise them, and hopefully can have a good introduction to this. Eiffel as a group term has three aspects to it. One is the event specification, and this is the common language that I mentioned before. Another is a lot of SDKs for like sending and receiving events and other tools where people willingly share and contribute to building tools that others can use. And when I say people, I mean the community. Community is everyone who is here today, plus a whole bunch of people online. Matthias will talk a bit about SDKs and tools, and community will sort of appear during the whole summit. So I'm going to focus this part on the event specification. So Eiffel, or that aspect of Eiffel, is a defined set of events, and specifically events mostly covering the ICD. That's the purpose or the foundation for why Eiffel was created. It is branching out, but most of it is very related to one or more aspects of CI/CD. There's a bunch of different categories of events. We are going to talk about some of them in more detail in this summit, and some of them will barely be mentioned. But we have events related to source changes. That is typically where the CI/CD journey starts, by someone either making something available for review or for verification, or actually like submitting or finalizing a change, so to say. Then we have events related to packaging. So this could be taking source from multiple places, taking files, etc., and combining them. Eiffel has a concept called a composition, where you basically link things together that you will test together or release together. And it also, in this category, you have events for producing package, like it could be a binary file or a zip file or something else, but you make something concrete out of that composition. And you can also release those packages as well. There are a bunch of events related to verification. So your test cases and test suites, and also verification of reported faults and issues. There is a rather new area related to deployment. I'll talk about that a little bit more, I think mainly tomorrow. We will be talking more about deployment. And there's also sort of more generic events related to flows. For instance, triggering, starting and finishing activities. And these activities could be anything from builds to packaging or like orchestration related things. It's Eiffel doesn't put any or doesn't make any assumptions of what activities you have in your flow. But you see, these top four, I would say, they are more in a group of what value is produced, because producing a test result is a value, producing a package is a value, and producing source is also a value. Whereas the last one is perhaps more related to understanding what is going on. Okay, so let's talk a bit about how an Eiffel event looks. It's split up into 3 parts, and we will go through them one by one. First part that I want to talk about is meta. So this is information about the event itself. And this is what helps other people or other systems understand, should I look at this event? Is it like, what is it signaling? So it contains event type and version. To talk a little bit about event types, I think Eiffel has something like 25 different events or something like that. They are all on the format of Eiffel something event. So Eiffel source change submitted event, or Eiffel activity triggered event. And this name is then what is stated as the event type. Then there is a version. So Eiffel versioning is basically there is no rule in Eiffel that says everything in the system is only allowed to use one version of a specific event. So it's perfectly fine to have, say, some older Eiffel producer who is not up to the latest version of some specific message yet to produce messages. And then it's up to the systems that listen if they can understand that message on it. And I think hopefully that will come up a bit when we talk about usage stories, but I think many systems do have a setup where different versions of events are produced. But usually between 2 versions, an event doesn't change drastically. Usually it's about adding some field or maybe modifying some field. So it's not that tricky. Then Eiffel produces, or the Eiffel project produces something called editions every now and then, which is like a selection of event versions that go together somehow. And I think usually producers would probably produce events belonging to one edition. Like when you get an SDK, you would probably send events to one edition. But the important part is that the events are versioned, so that a parser, for instance, can understand how to interpret the event that is coming. Meta also contains a unique identifier for every event. we will talk later about why it is very important that each event can be uniquely identified. But for now, this is a UUID, which is sent in every event. It also optionally talks a bit about the source. Where did this event come from? That can be helpful, for instance, if you want to get more information about some entity or some object, then you can go to the source and ask it for more information. And there is also an optional part for security. If you happen to be sending events where you want to be able to prove that no one has modified the event, then you can do things like signing and have other security aspects to it. There are some more parts like a timestamp and other things like that, tags and things, but I think these four are the ones I want to mention now. Next part is called links. So most event, actually I would probably say every event, it relates to something else that has happened. For instance, a build, it usually builds source. So it relates to the events for that source. And a deployment usually relates to a package or an artifact. So it relates to that artifact. And a heavy sort of design strategy when it comes to Eiffel is to not duplicate information in events, but instead link to the event that contains the information that you're looking for. I mentioned before when we talked about the agenda about aggregation, which I think Emil will talk more about later. That is very related to this because, of course, one sort of consequence of having everything done through links is that you can't really just look at one message and get everything that you need. You need to aggregate stuff together, but Eiffel has solutions for that. So when it comes to links, I think there are two types, the way I look at it. One is, I will call them same type links or update links. So say that you have, you've triggered an activity. So there's an Eiffel activity triggered event. And this contains the information about the activity, like the name, for instance. Then when that activity actually starts, there's another event called activity started. And rather than repeating information about the activity here, it simply links to the activity triggered event. So these two together provide the most up-to-date information about this activity. And finally, when the activity is finished, or maybe if it's cancelled or something, there are events for that as well. And they then link back through this sort of chain. But for me, it makes sense to talk about this as update links. So we're taking something that we have announced before and we're providing some updates to that. So something is like moving through the flow. So that's one type of links. The other that I want to talk about, it's when you link different types, or we can call them association links. So say that you have your development process, you're making source changes, you're reusing artifacts that you've created before, you're reusing compositions that you've created before, and you want to build a new composition. So a collection of source and configuration and all that stuff that you want to be able to verify and release. Then when you send this composition defined event, you link to everything that is in that composition you have over here. And then when you're actually building the package, you send an artifact created event and you link back to the composition that you're using to build this artifact. And when you're deploying it later, you link back to the artifact created. So when you're looking at the artifact deployed event, through links, you can trace all the way back to what was originally included in the composition that you're building. So yeah, I would call these association links. They help build a bigger picture of what is going on. Yes, I think that's it about links. Then last is the data part. So this is where we actually talk about what the event happened to, or what the event is trying to communicate. So event data is specific to the event type. So the data in an activity triggered event is not the same as the data in a composition defined event, and it's not the same in a confidence level modified event. The meta, I should have said, is pretty much identical for every message that belongs to the same edition. And the links, they are also mostly different between different event types, but some are common. But let's take some examples for event data. So in this update chain that I mentioned before, the activity triggered would, for instance, contain the name of the activity that we are running. And activity started would say, okay, now we have started running. So if you want to follow the logs live, here is the place where you can do that. And activity finished would then talk about the outcome and other things like, okay, where have we persisted the logs? Where can they be found for all future? And again, activity started does not contain the name of activity. It contains a link to activity triggered, which contains the name of the activity. So aggregation or following links is the way you sort of paint the whole picture using that. Yes. Then there is a fourth part. I hope I don't get yelled at by the technical committee for bringing this up. I really like it, and I think it's great that Eiffel has it. But Eiffel also has a lot of, like, I wouldn't say warnings, recommendations for how to use it, and that is custom data. So Eiffel supports, well, it supports custom events actually also, but custom data is perhaps more relevant for this. It's basically a key value store where you can put in whatever you want. So if you want to add stuff to the event for you to understand or be able to visualize something, you can do that in custom data. I think the Eiffel sort of specification, it recommends that rather than just happily adding custom data for everything, think about, is there some other field that could be used for this? Is it something that we feel is missing in the event definition? We should add it to the data field, and we can bring it up to the community, and other recommendations on how to use it. But it's there, so no one is forced to be limited when they communicate by what is sort of specified in the proper specification. You do need to be aware of, though, that if you start putting stuff in custom data, then tools that implement just the raw Eiffel protocol, they are not going to be able to understand what is in there. So it would mainly be if you want to do something specific internally in your own organization. But it's there. So to summarize this part a little bit, we talked about meta, which is information about the event, and importantly, a unique ID. We have links that provide associations and updates. The links, what they actually are, if we look at the JSON, which we will in a second, is the name of the link type and this unique identifier of the message that we are linking to. And then we have data which is specific to every event type and contains things like activity names and test outcomes and such stuff. So typically, an Eiffel event ends up being a JSON object when it's actually being transported. I'm not sure if is there any scenario where an Eiffel message becomes something other than JSON. No. So you would typically see something like this. I was about to say that, okay, this is a small representation of an Eiffel message, but it actually isn't. This is pretty much a complete message, and I would expect messages like this to appear in pretty standard Eiffel scenarios. And the reason why it's not super heavy is to a large extent because we have links. So this is an Eiffel activity finished events. It's talking about the outcome of some activity. It has a version, as I mentioned. So this is the latest one, I think. It has a timestamp. So this is like Unix epoch time, I think is the definition. And then it has this unique identifier. So that would be the meta part. Then we have links. And in this case, the mandatory link for an Eiffel activity finished event is what activity are we executing. So this would point to an activity started event. And it would, yeah, the one with this ID. So this is like the chain you would follow to understand where is this activity running and what is its name. Then you have the data part where the mandatory stuff is just the conclusion. Was this activity successful, or did it fail, or did it time out, or was it aborted, something like that. And then you have the opportunity to send custom data if you want as well. So this is what is actually being sent on the bus. Yes, I think that was everything I wanted to say about what Eiffel is. So we can move a bit. Actually, I should stop here. Do we have any questions or things we should dig a bit more into when it comes to actual Eiffel events? Otherwise, there will be plenty of opportunity to ask that in the Q&A later today and in any breaks or whenever you feel like it. Okay, then I will move on to why Eiffel is important. One major part, and you heard this a bit in the introduction, is that Eiffel is tried and tested. It has been used in very, very large deployments for a large number of years. So when you heard people in the introduction talk about how long they have been using Eiffel for, it's anywhere between like 11 years and 4 and 5 years, but not like the people who have been using it for a long time have really been using it for a long time. Ericsson started 2012. I found a number from a slightly older slide that said that in Ericsson 2.5 million events are sent per day, but I think you have a new number there.
Just about 3.
Yeah, so around 3 million events per day. So that's not a small number of events, and that perhaps also helps explain why we don't want individual events to be super heavy, because if we want to send a few million of them, it gets expensive. Eiffel was open sourced back in 2016, and it really does have an active community. I'm constantly surprised when I go to the Eiffel GitHub project and see like 10 repos that were updated in the last 3 days. So a lot of organizations are using Eiffel in their production, and they want to build improvements to Eiffel and related SDKs and tools, both for their own needs, but they are also contributing it back to the rest of the community, which is very nice. It has a technical committee, as we talked about before. I think it currently acts as an Ericsson or in that technical committee. And it's part of something called the continuous delivery landscape. I'm going to go on a small tangent here to talk about the Continuous Delivery Foundation. We will have a larger session on that tomorrow when the executive director for the Continuous Delivery Foundation comes here and talks to us. But the landscape lists a bunch of different tools and other related things for CI and CD. And here under the box tracing and messaging, you will find the Eiffel protocol. You will also find CD events. And I think that is going to appear in some discussions. It's definitely going to come up tomorrow. So I think I will just talk a little bit about CD events as well. CD events is, it's also a specification for events to be sent as part of CI/CD. It's fundamentally different from Eiffel, I would say, in a number of aspects. One is that it was sort of started 2 years ago, maybe 3, depending on exactly what you consider a starting point. And it has a lot of Eiffel involvement, not Eiffel the protocol so much, but Eiffel the community. So for instance, Emil here is a chair of the CD event specification. So it's something that exists. It has a broader scope, at least when it comes to the interests of the people involved. So it has people from like IBM and Apple and other things like that. It's incubating, as you saw on the landscape. So that means there is a very limited set of events, I would say, and also a limited set of tools and like production examples of CDMs. There is also a translation service that is being worked on between like CDMs and Eiffel. So I think the idea is to make them compatible. But definitely CDMs is something to keep an eye on as well. I think someone mentioned that before in the room, like it's a much bigger step to go from not event-driven to event-driven than it is to decide exactly what protocol we want to use. But Eiffel has a lot more tried and tested about it. And there is a session tomorrow, as I said, I think at 10:30, where CD events and stuff will be talked about in more detail. So Eiffel tried and tested. Another part is something that Matthias is going to talk about after the break, and that is Eiffel has a large ecosystem of tools and SDKs and services and even information recommendations. So starting with Eiffel, you don't need to build stuff from scratch. Stand on the shoulders of giants. And finally, because Eiffel continues to evolve, and some of the sessions that we will have in this summit is directly about evolving the Eiffel protocol to better cover use cases that we have and also cover new use cases. So it's not in any way a stagnant protocol, it's something that keeps evolving and has a lot of active people working with it and a lot of dedication from various parties. Yes, I think that was it. Do we have any questions or additions that someone would like to make about this? Yes.
Thank you very much. First, nice overview. Thank you. I have one thing I was thinking about. I think you also illustrate what the problem we have when you say, oh, what is Eiffel? And then you go in to say, yeah, I will talk about the protocol part. And we can see in Ericsson also we have the Eiffel, like it mean a team or a tool. Or yeah, most people might not even know about that there's a protocol somewhere. Do you have any thoughts on naming or how do we talk about this? Should we have a different name on the tool ecosystem than compared to the protocol, or should we always go and say, now I'm talking about the Eiffel protocol, I'm not talking about this Eiffel compliant or this operations team? Or
yeah, I think, so the question was when it's easy to get confused when you say Eiffel, like are you talking about the community or some tool or some team or some event specification? And I think it's a very good question. I haven't thought that much about it. I will turn to the technical committee and see what they say. For me, it's usually fine to say the Eiffel protocol or an Eiffel event or the Eiffel community. But that would mean that you need to have this suffix whenever you talk about it.
Yeah, and I think that's the best thing we can do today. So use the suffix and not just say, I don't like Eiffel or Eiffel sucks or Eiffel doesn't have any value for me or something. I mean, you need to be more specific. As long as we have different things with the prefix Eiffel, we should use the full name. That's not to underline.
Yeah.
Then I just want to add what you gave a lot of negative examples, saying that, but that is a problem for us. That yes, we are running. If the Ericsson are running a huge system, of course there are problems with it. And then, but then they also have this guilt by association. Just because someone said I heard something that had something with Eiffel to do did not work, therefore Eiffel is bad, and that's exactly. But we also have a really good lot of good things. So yeah, finding a good way to talk about different things around this ecosystem is really good.
Yeah.
Or think about it if you implement it.
Proposals are welcome.
Yeah. So I know, Emil, that there's one part of the Eiffel sort of ecosystem that I don't know that much about, and that is something called Sepia. But there, it was decided to use a different name. Do you know why?
It's Eiffel Sepia, or what is the stand for?
It's like a reference architecture.
Yeah, it is a radiation of.
Now I'm putting Evan on the spot here.
Yeah. It's a reference of implementation, yes, or reference recommendation architecture or reference architecture for how to set up your Eiffel system. So it contains like concepts on you need some kind of message producer, you need a message consumer, you need some message store or event store. You need probably some visualizer to get some overview of your system. It has those different aspects, and then it can recommend different tools from the ecosystem that fits in those different groups, and you can put those together. That architecture has been, it's there. It has been quite dormant for years. I think it's still valid, but we haven't added new tools to that architecture recently. And we haven't added like SDKs and such things either. So there are things to add there. But it provides some kind of guidance at least on what an Eiffel-aware system would look like.
I just found out that the Sepia is a recursive acronym.
Yeah.
Sepia is short for Sepia Eiffel Protocol Implementation Architecture.
Exactly. Eiffel Protocol Implementation Architecture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But still, it's a good point. I think it's easy to get confused just saying Eiffel because it has so many aspects to it. More questions or comments? Yes.
As I said, I am an engineer. So I was thinking about how do you visualize, you went through the data links and custom something. How do you visualize for me, as an end user? How do I see? Do I get notifications or?
So this will relate to what Matthias is going to talk about. I think the answer is that there are many ways to do it. I know, Ericsson, for instance, you have some sort of like follow your commit solution, which receives Eiffel events and produces like a visual image to see like where is my change in the flow or how is this build going. I don't know at Axis what you do. Can you talk a few?
Yeah, we have something also called follow my commits that does pretty much the same thing. But yeah, but there's no standard open source tool for doing that, and I think you can definitely do a sort of low level visualizer of the events. I think that would be very useful to have open source, and it's something we've been talking about doing, but we haven't done it. But usually, visualizing it is typically tied to your CI and business processes. So it's probably hard to do that in a generic way, unfortunately, unless you want to build something huge that's immensely configurable, but then it probably won't be a good fit for everyone anyway. But I think it would be very beneficial if we could have just a lightweight debug level visualizer to have something at least.
And I think that also brings me to something that I probably should. I mentioned it very early on in the presentation that Eiffel also provides a common language for people. And that is something that I would claim is very beneficial. So one example that Eiffel has is something called a confidence level. It's usually quite tricky to talk about quality, like how good is this thing that like this package or this piece of source code. Is it ready for me to start testing? So like an example from Volvo Cars, we talk about 4 different test levels. We have unit level, component level, domain level, and complete car level. And you can't just go by intuition when you want to pick something from, say, component level, where we're talking about one piece of embedded software, to a domain where we have multiple pieces of embedded software collected. We need a way to communicate, like when is something on the component level ready to move to unit level. And confidence levels is something that provides that. It basically allows you to define either a numeric value or a stamp. And you can say, okay, on the component level, our job is to set the stamp ready for domain testing. That's the output that we produce. And there is then a confidence level modified event in Eiffel that when you put that stamp, it goes out as an event, and domain can pick that up and say, oh, now they set a new confidence level on this thing. That means it's ready for us to start testing. But it's not only for the automated system, it's also for the people, because then a person from domain can come to me on the component level and say, hey, when you set the confidence level ready for domain, what does that include? Like, do you have this type of testing in that? And there are many other examples, like talking about compositions or talking about deployments, where I think, at least my experience is that the terms and concepts that come with the Eiffel protocol are so well thought through that they tend to permeate in discussions between people as well. I'm sure you have experienced the same, and other people around this room as well, that something like confidence levels, it tends to be something that people use in their day-to-day terminology as well, because it fills a hole that tends to appear if you don't have a common language for those kind of things. So yeah, it's even as we said before, Eiffel itself tends to be sort of hidden in a way that most people don't see the messages. The concepts tend to appear on higher levels. Yes, do we have more questions or comments?
I have one more question.
Yeah.
So you have so many events, like event start, event execution, event finished. I'm not the. I'm a worker in the C team. So can you give like a simple example? So for example, I have a commit some code to my component and I publish it. So like what kind of event I'm going to go through till the end?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about this tomorrow a bit, but I will take a short summary or short trip now. Now, I don't know all the events in my head, so technically committee people will have to, or anyone. But typically, the first thing you would see if you're working with source is I think, an event called source change created. Yes, so that means you as a developer has made something available for review and testing and stuff like that. Typically, when you upload a pull request to GitHub or a change in Gerrit. Then that is being worked on. There may be a whole chain of CI stuff starting there, doing like unit testing and verification and stuff like that to feed back to your change if it went well or not. And then eventually, either an automated system or you or someone else will take the decision that, okay, now this is ready to be merged. And then there's another event called source change submitted. And then that signals to a lot of build systems, okay, now we have new source that are sort of properly merged. Now we need to go start a bunch of builds and things. And then what will typically happen, I think, is that in the build step, first you will probably announce that a build is ongoing by sending activity triggered and then activity started. So that's the sort of update track. Actually, I should go back to that picture. It shows things pretty well. The update track up here. So this will sort of loop for every activity that is being done. And I think, if I remember correctly, in activity triggered, it's possible to say, like, what is the previous activity? Or what am I relating to? You can like visualize the chain of events there. But what will happen in parallel is that your source change gets bunched in with other stuff, probably, into a composition. So a composition is a very important event in Eiffel to bring things together. You can have source, like multiple source changes or from multiple repositories. So you can include like configuration files and stuff from artifact storages, etc. Everything that your build script is going to use would make it into a composition. And then the build script would create an artifact based on it. So it would first publish a composition defined when it has decided what it's going to use, and then an artifact created when it has actually produced it. Then there is another event not shown in this picture, which is artifact published, which is announcing to the world that, okay, I have uploaded this file now to somewhere where it can be downloaded. And then I guess typically once you have the sort of image or artifact available, you would start to do a lot of verification on it. Then there is events related to test suites and test cases. So you would see a whole lot of events coming from like test case triggered, started, finished, triggered, started, finished, and then test suite, etc. So there's a bunch of events there. And I'm sure there are different activities that will be involved in that as well. And eventually you come to the conclusion that now we have tested this enough, then you would send a confidence level modified event. And based on that, maybe someone takes this and deploys it somewhere, and you will get artifact deployed. So there isn't like a single true journey through Eiffel, but I would say every step where someone could want to start something is a good place to send an Eiffel event. And I think the Eiffel protocol is quite well designed when it comes to identifying the different places where value is produced. For instance, say that you have the test case finished. If that fails, if a test case fails, you might want to start running some debugging processes or data collection processes. And there's an event for that. And when something is deployed, maybe you want to make an announcement, and there are events for that. So I'm not sure, Emil or anyone else.
I have, if you revert something, it happens the same, or?
Yes, I would say so. I'm not experienced with that, but there are ways to signal in events that something is going back to a previous version in some scenarios, I think. But usually it would be seen as another update. Eiffel doesn't care super much if your source change is a revert or a new change. That's my view on it. Yeah.
But it's actually an interesting use case. I mean, would it be valid to have a link type where you can say this change reverts or rolls back another change? That could be interesting. It's currently not in the protocol, but I don't think it's unreasonable to add it.
There are some links that are called like previous version or something like that.
Yep.
Not typically indicating a revert, but just indicating that, what was the last thing that happened in this. But yeah, that was a perhaps too detailed journey through different types of events. But the important takeaway, in my view, is that through your flow and through your process, you are producing value. And Eiffel has a lot of events to signal that some value has been produced. And it has a lot of signals or events to signal that the stuff is ongoing, which we see pretty much on this picture, I hope.